and welcome to a brand new episode of Beyond the Indus. I'm your host, Tushar Shetty. So recently, there has been a lot of coverage about the breakdown of the US-India relationship. In a move that almost no one could have foreseen just a few months back, the US slapped India with a 50% tariff, one of the highest rates in the world. And the ensuing fallout has led to one of the worst crises in the US-India partnership in almost 3 decades. But amidst the doldrums that India finds itself in, we're witnessing a surprising resurgence in the US-Pakistan relationship, with Pakistan receiving just a 19% tariff, the lowest in South Asia, alongside multi-billion-dollar crypto and investment agreements. Since a May June conflict between India and Pakistan, Pakistan's military chief and de facto co-head of state, Asim Munir, has met with President Trump twice, while his old friend, Narendra Modi, has been somewhat sidelined. So how did Pakistan manage this miraculous comeback? To understand this, we have to look at the complicated and often toxic relationship between Pakistan and the United States, and explore Pakistan's wider foreign policy and its diplomatic strategy as it balances tricky relationships with global superpowers to help manage its often delicate domestic situation and to hedge against its long-term rival, India. And that is the focus of our episode today. We're bringing you a mega episode with 2 former Pakistani ambassadors and one of the world's leading South Asia analysts on Pakistan's foreign policy, its relationship with the United States, and how it skillfully navigates its foreign policy to keep maintaining its relevance in global geopolitics. We'll be speaking later to Ambassador Husain Haqqani, as well as Michael Kugelman, but first we'll be getting an overview on the fundamentals of Pakistan's foreign policy and diplomatic strategy with Ambassador Touqir Hussain. Stay tuned. So today we're happy to be joined by Ambassador Touqir Hussain. Ambassador Hussain is a former senior diplomat from Pakistan who has served as ambassador to Brazil, Spain, and Japan, and has held senior positions in the Pakistani Foreign Office, including that of Additional Foreign Secretary and Diplomatic Advisor to the Prime Minister. Until recently, Ambassador Hussain was visiting senior fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and is currently adjunct professor in the Asian Studies program in the School of Foreign Service, Georgetown University. So it's great to have someone with his breadth and depth of experience to help us understand the fundamentals of Pakistan's foreign policy. So Ambassador Hussain, welcome to Beyond the Indus, and thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Tushar. It's a privilege to be interviewed by diplomats.
Fantastic. So Ambassador Hussain, to begin with, could you just give our listeners a basic outline of Pakistan's foreign policy objectives? What are the historical and geographical factors that have shaped Pakistan's foreign policy priorities? And how have those priorities evolved over its now nearly 8 decades of existence?
Tushar, thanks for asking me. And it's a tall order to sum up Pakistan's foreign policy of about nearly 8 decades in a few minutes, but I will try. I think basically you have to go back to Pakistan's foundational issues. The unique circumstances of its birth created in the teeth of opposition from India. Pakistan very naturally and understandably felt an existential threat to its security. And it also, as a new state, faced serious challenge of economic survival. So Pakistan very naturally looked for a great power support. Its elite was Western dominated, educated in West, and the system being capitalist. It had looked to the West, and being an Islamic country, it has reservations towards Soviet Union. So basically, we're talking of United States, Europe, and countries like Japan, with which Pakistan was seeking a relationship. Secondly, Pakistan also looked at its immediate neighborhood. It faced irredentist demands from Afghanistan. With the problems on both eastern and western flanks, Pakistan had to make sure that it had peaceful relations with the other 2 neighbors, and they were China and Iran. So with China, Pakistan started off with a very correct relationship. China was newly independent, the revolution was new, so naturally it was struggling itself, so it didn't have much to offer, but Pakistan started on a right footing with China. Pakistan had a sizable Shia population and could not afford hostile relationship with Iran. So Pakistan sought a friendly relationship with Iran. As for the remaining relations, being an Islamic country, Pakistan obviously had a natural attraction towards the Islamic world. Pakistan had good diplomats. They took advantage of the emerging geopolitics of the Cold War, and America was looking for allies in the Cold War in South Asia. So the United States searched for allies, and Pakistan's own search for big power relationship, especially with the U.S., was in a perfect fit. So in Pakistan, found a great power relationship it was looking for. American assistance established some semblance of power and balance of power in the region between India and Pakistan. It secured Pakistan's survival and with its economic assistance as security assistance. The U.S. essentially helped Pakistan survive and contributed to its self-confidence, which helped its diplomacy, not only in bilateral diplomacy, but multilateral diplomacy. And to its credit, the U.S. engagement strengthened Pakistan's defense capabilities and potential for future economic development. That was of critical help in stabilizing a new state and launched a platform for sustained economic progress. But on the flip side, U.S. connection strengthened the elitist-based ruling establishment, particularly the army, as it provided the services Washington was looking for. It strengthened Pakistan army, became very sort of dominant in Pakistan's national life, and it also became an important factor in Pakistan's foreign policy. So for that reason, Pakistan became an attractive partner to China, to the United States and Saudi Arabia, who became a kind of principal beneficiaries for Pakistan. Nothing remains in foreign policy as it is. It changes like life. So 1962, Sino-Indian War brought out the case for strategic convergence with China. And this strategic relationship has continued to grow from strength to strength. The Cold War went through several conversions, changing U.S.-Pakistan relations, which saw its ups and downs. Pakistan's internal dynamics changed with the balance of power shifting in favor of politicians, and with the creation of Bangladesh in 1973. So all these things impacted Pakistan's foreign policy. Pakistan sort of reinforced its Islamic identity, and with the 1973 oil well, the Arab countries became very important in Pakistan's foreign policy. They needed immigrant labor, and that brought Pakistan and Saudi Arabia very close. Saudi Arabia also needed something. It needed security that was provided to some extent by Pakistan's military. The period after 1971 has seen many ups and downs in Pakistan's domestic and foreign policies. Prime Minister Bhutto's socialist experiments, Islamization, and Pakistan's struggle with democratization, and the continued domination of the elite in the running of the country. All that affected Pakistan's relationship in the neighborhood, Pakistan's relationship with the U.S., Pakistan's relationship with the Middle East, especially in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia's relationship with Pakistan was not the same as before under MBS, which is changing. So one constant factor, the relations with India have continued to be strained and conflicted, and relations with Afghanistan remain troubled. And their coalition against Pakistan troubles Pakistan from time to time. And within Pakistan, military salience has continued to grow, but Pakistan, on the plus side, has continued to feel militarily more secure and self-confident, especially because of its nuclear capability. And its self-confidence was enhanced after a good performance in India in the conflict in May, in which both its military and diplomacy performed well. And now we see a very different situation where geopolitics have taken such a turn after Trump that all countries are at their wits' end, and we will talk about it.
You know, Ambassador Hussain, we've heard many discussions about Pakistan's relations with, say, the U.S., China, and India. But I'm keen to get a broader understanding of Pakistan's diplomacy with the rest of the world as well. As someone who's held postings in major partners across Europe, Asia, and South America, how would you characterize Pakistan's broader global diplomatic engagement and the key pillars of its current foreign policy? Could you also give us some insight into the institutional setup and dynamics of Pakistan's diplomatic corps? What would an aspiring Pakistani diplomat have to learn about his diplomatic strategy during the training?
Again, a very sort of well-crafted question to Shahush. Compliment to you. Let me say by saying that Pakistan's global diplomacy has passed through many phases. Okay? Like in case of all countries, nothing remains the same. Pakistan had security needs that have not diminished in its importance, and they remain a constant in its foreign policy. All this need has been well fulfilled by China and the United States. It has had economic challenges in which the early phase of relationship with the U.S., that is from mid-1950s to mid-60s, helped. And now, although that is not the last time the United States really helped Pakistan directly, but now its indirect help through IMF, World Bank remains, and the United States also remains Pakistan's top export destination. The Chinese relationship, which started off basically in the military and strategic field, has now moved on to the economic with the CPEC. CPEC has projects are going on for the past 10 years, and they're making a reasonable progress. They have had problems, but on the whole, progress is good. In between, Pakistan has developed important relations with other countries, about which you have asked me. Most importantly, with Islamic countries, especially with oil-bearing countries. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries have been an important source of not only oil, but also immigrant sort of labor. Saudi-Pakistan relationship is very old, resting on many factors. They have had a history of military cooperation, as Saudi regime needed to diversify its security partnerships, as it didn't want to depend entirely on Washington. After the 1979 terrorist assault on Kaaba, a Pakistani brigade, military brigade, was stationed in the kingdom. Pakistani leadership continues to reiterate and sort of follow sustained commitment to defend the monarchy. After taking office, the Chief of Army, Field Marshal Asim Munir, paid his first visit to any foreign country, to Saudi Arabia. And the same was the case with the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. In fact, according to the statement that was issued after Shehbaz Sharif's visit, there's a great emphasis placed on kingdom's sort of prospective support for Pakistan's economy and mutual desire to strengthen trade and investment. If I'm not wrong, about 2 billion Pakistanis work in Saudi Arabia, and their biggest source of remittances. In recent years, the United States, in addition to financial help from China, the U.S. and the West, has also been depending on Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries for political support, and especially when it face any economic crisis or liquidity crisis. They have been rolling over Pakistan's debt and also trying to deposit in the central bank to shore up Pakistan's reserve. With Russia also, Pakistan is trying to promote relations. They were always strained because of Russia's close relations with India and Pakistan's close relations with the U.S. In 2014, Pakistan and Russia decided to sort of get over the past and seek the better relations. A major reason for the positive response from Russia was that its relationship with India was facing some problems. So Russia wanted to, in any case, opt for a more balanced approach towards South Asia. This was not really a Russian pullback from India, but an attempt to diversify its options. Secondly, Pakistan is also a prospective market for Russia's military equipment and investment. Yet the relationship has not grown fast enough. I think the reasons are obvious. Russia relationship with India still remains an important factor and an inhibition. Ukraine war has also cast a shadow. So overall, I would say that so far, Pakistan-Russia ties have not made much progress because they're not very broad-based. Even the prospects of economic relations, including trade, remains very modest, but at least the political relationship has improved. Japan, where I was ambassador, has been an important source of development assistance. At one point, it was the number one donor of economic assistance to Pakistan, and Pakistan was one of the major beneficiaries of Japanese aid in Asia. Pakistan has also been getting aid from European countries, and with whom Pakistan has good relations. Pakistan has good relations with ASEAN countries, and EU has extended GPS. So overall, good relations with all these countries. Pakistan has maintained good relations with Iran, though it has faced challenges from time to time because of the Arab-Iran rivalry, and it's sometimes conflict between them. But I must say, to the credit of Pakistani policy makers and the Foreign Office and the military, Pakistan has navigated these challenges very well. It has generally followed a policy of bilateralism. It has made sure that relations with one power are not caught up in that power's rivalries or conflict with other countries with whom Pakistan has good relations. It's a kind of a sign of success of this policy that at times Arabs and Iranians have both sought Pakistan's help in mediating between them. And we all know that Pakistan played an historic role as a bridge between the U.S. and China in 1971. But let's face it, I don't want to give you only the positive picture. Pakistan foreign policy has not always succeeded. Until a few years ago, it passed through serious internal crisis, which of course had an impact on Pakistan's international standing and image, and then internal security challenges kind of focused all Pakistan's attention internally. Relationship with India got more strained because India took advantage of it by trying to isolate Pakistan internationally. It hasn't entirely succeeded because Pakistan has recovered. The worst is over. The economy is stabilizing, and internal situation, though serious, is receiving serious national attention and hopefully will improve. You asked me what I would tell the aspiring diplomats. Pakistan, good training program, by the way, and well-rounded training. Many diplomats are sent abroad for scholarships also. So I would tell the aspiring diplomats that nothing remains the same. The foreign policy always has a context. Issues exist in time and space, and they change. So be open to changes. Be conscious of Pakistan's strength, but also its weaknesses. Don't be carried away by successes and don't be disheartened by the failures. And most importantly, I would tell them, neighborhood is very important in making a foreign policy. And have a foreign policy that does not prioritize security over development. It should be the other way around. And the last lesson, which I would tell them, and I have also followed in my life, diplomatic life, that foreign policy is not just about foreign policy. It's an extension of domestic policies, and issues acquire a politics of their own. In other words, there is a foreign policy and there is a politics of the issue. That's very important.
Absolutely, and that's sage advice indeed. But you mentioned security versus development in foreign policy, and that brings me to the question about Pakistan's military, because Pakistan's military has often had an outsized role in its foreign policy. And I'm curious as to how that role has evolved and shaped Pakistan's foreign policy over the years. You know, is the military's input sort of ad hoc or institutional? Does it depend on the individuals in power, or are there areas that are considered sort of the exclusive domain of the military establishment? To what extent does the Pakistan military and intelligence establishment influence the planning and execution of foreign policy overall? And do their priorities take precedence over the civilian government's foreign policy plans?
Tushar, as usual, it's a million-dollar question. Let me try to answer. Let me begin by saying that the military's role in Pakistan's foreign policy is not unique. Okay? I remember when after 9/11, how the wars were started by the United States, and it was an open secret discussed by academia, think tank community, and even retired U.S. diplomats that U.S. foreign policy had become too militarized. We all know State Department was overlooked or sidelined or ignored. But here is an important difference. Foreign policy was militarized, but it remained under the civilian leadership. It did not change the civilian supremacy over the military. The problem in Pakistan is not that the military has an oversized role in foreign policy, that the civilians never had true supremacy over the military in the real sense of the word. And for that, I think you have to go back to the early years of Pakistan's political history, that there were existential fears in Pakistan that instilled a sense of insecurity in Pakistan, that influenced Pakistan's policy choices, especially in the institution building. After the founder Jinnah's death, the small-time leadership that emerged was not really adequate to handling these momentous challenges. You desperately needed stability. There was a huge administrative challenge of setting up a new state and its institutions, the daunting task of coping with millions of refugees and existential threats, which I keep talking about, to its national security, led to the pivotal role and contribution of the civil military bureaucracy. Most of them were British trained and British oriented, and had a good measure of idealism about the new state and its prospect for success. So bureaucracy became the foundation of a developing administrative military state because of the challenges that had. And Pakistani politicians continued to sort of give them space because they could not outperform the military. And in fact, very soon they found that perhaps the best is to collaborate with the military and sort of become a kind of a partner in keeping the status quo and the political status quo. So Pakistani politics became a contest for political power among the elite, and sort of most organized among those groups were the civil military bureaucracy. And that sort of led to their dominance in the political life of Pakistan. So to sum up this part, the democratic process suffered on two counts: the incompetence of the politicians and ambitions of the more organized groups like the civil military bureaucracy, which was sort of turned later on to entirely a military bureaucracy. With the successive military rules, the military managed to enhance its sort of position, its privileges, and its role in the country, which has some positive results, it has some negative results. To help itself, it sort of kept the public sort of captive to its own national vision of what the country was about and its national purpose and its national priorities. It got sort of more than fair share of resources and managed to sort of define, as I said, country priorities. And so no wonder most of Pakistan's achievements have been in the area of security. Nuclear capability, for example, missiles and conventional weapons development, for example. The army gave Pakistan some sense of national achievement. To their credit, to the civilians, one must mention the role that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made in the historic decision to start the nuclear program, but it was completed later on by the military. Bhutto was also instrumental in Pakistan's strategic opening to China. But other than these two things, I think most of the achievements are owed to the military's own sense of what Pakistan should be and what its priorities should be. And as I said, it has been a mixed story. Over the decades, there has been very little change in this equation, with the result that we have a kind of a mix of democracy and authoritarian rule. While it has not been an entirely democratic, it has not been entirely authoritarian either. So it's a mix. It has worked. The important thing is that military's role has been accepted by the civilians. on critical foreign policy issues like India, Pakistan, relations with China, and the U.S., military has a dominant role in policy making. But this is not how it should be. But Pakistan does face kind of serious challenges which neither the military nor the civilians by itself have been able to resolve. But perhaps this requires a major national effort. But meanwhile, short of that effort, I think things are going reasonably well, and the military's role has been accepted by the civilians. Onus is really up to them to rectify the situation. Basically, what you may say, it's a condominium, which is perhaps understandable given Pakistan's internal security challenges and a foreign policy in which the military gives Pakistan the salience because the military's role advancing strategic interests of big powers in all rich countries. So military has been kind of instrumental in bringing Pakistan some degree of sort of salience in foreign relations. Not the most desirable situation, but under the circumstances, perhaps the best possible.
Right. And, just a small follow-up on that, because I think no one can deny the military's important role in being a stabilizing institution, particularly in Pakistan's early years. But I do wonder sometimes when I think of, let's say, Nawaz Sharif and Vajpayee during the Lahore Declaration and the outbreak of Kargil soon after, and even later on in the 2010s, I think this was around the Dawn leaks, when, Nawaz Sharif wanted, I believe, a more amicable stance with India. It was overruled by the military. So I do wonder if when there is a conflict between the civilian and military government priorities, when the civilian government might want to make, certain moves, the militaries would take precedence over that. So do you agree with that characterization that the military tends to assert its influence?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Tushar. Let me answer this. It has occurred to me many times also. The civilians have taken on the military in a very bad context, in the sense that while their own performance was not that great, I personally feel the civilians, if they want to take on the military, and perhaps they should at some stage for the good of the country, or whatever, they first need to show to the public that they are better than the military. I mean, they need to do something. They were given chances, a lot of chances. I also was working in the Prime Minister's office. I had some knowledge of how the political process was. They did not sort of do much to improve public confidence in their ability to do well for the country. So in that situation, when you try to take on a more organized group, which has its own sort of constituency in the public, you are sort of allowing it to wage a propaganda war against you and win the public approval. So while for us academics, for you and me and for others, it looks a very easy task for the civilians to do it and not to succeed. In actual, on ground, it's not that easy because I think public by now has figured out, according to my understanding, that each one of them has not been most desirable sort of way to run Pakistan. The politicians have not been as honest and democratic as they explained, and the military too has been more concerned about their own corporate and personal interests. So I think it's a context between the sort of two imperfect competitors, in which it's easy for more organized group to undermine the other. Does it make sense to you?
Absolutely, and I'm thinking of right now of Prime Minister Imran Khan's tenure, because I think he was trying to make certain moves on the foreign policy front that would have been potentially destabilizing to at least Pakistan-U.S. relations, if I'm not mistaken, where I think the military kind of had to step in to say that, this is important and you can't destabilize this no matter how popular you are at home. So I understand the importance of foreign policy and why perhaps I can understand the perspective, at least, that why perhaps the military might think that it's too vital to leave to someone who doesn't maybe have a sense of continuity that they might. At least I can understand that view. So coming to, let's say, the US, India, Pakistan triangle, we've seen recently, as you mentioned, the second Trump presidency, we've seen Pakistan successfully manage the US relationship to secure lower tariffs, while, India inexplicably find itself souring its once inevitable US partnership. Is this current situation indicative of a longer term rethink of the US approach to South Asia? I think Uzair Yunus has just written an article for The Diplomat where he's made this case. And I wonder, how will Pakistan, manage, let's say, a growing US-India relationship if relations between those two countries do recover?
Uzair Yunus is a good friend of mine, and I must compliment him. He wrote an excellent article in The Diplomat, which I have read. It's very it reflects his strategic thinking, and I compliment him especially for that. But when you look at it, the kind of more mundane level, perhaps the changes are not that strategic as he has made them out to be. Let me explain, okay? Basically, as I see it, I'm going to say almost the same thing which he said, but making it look less strategic. Trump likes to keep the relations with other countries and deals balanced, and his effort is to make that balance in his favor. Being a businessman is concerned about balance sheet, and balance sheet is always should be in his favor. That's what the tariffs are about. So basically, he is involved in a broader global effort to reconfigure trade, finance, and security. And that is guiding his foreign policy in general, and especially so in relations with India and Pakistan. Let me say, he's not downgrading the relations with India. I'm surprised at the hype. I see scores and maybe hundreds of articles being written as if sky has fallen on India. I don't see it that way. I think this relationship is going to recover. You will see that. He's not downgrading the relationship with India, or he's not upgrading with Pakistan as some people think. He is rebalancing. And to use as Yunus' words, recalibrating. I think recalibrating is a good word that he used. I agree with him there. Trump thinks that relations were too much in favor of India and too much against Pakistan. Pakistan is a traditional ally. I remember Imran Khan's visit to the White House. I think his visit went very well. Trump was impressed, and to the extent that Imran managed to impress him, I would say Pakistan managed to impress him. Pakistan also is seen as an important partner in counterterrorism. And thus, it's kind of looking after a major potential foreign policy headache for Trump, because the terrorism remains the threat to global security, threat to U.S. security. So if Pakistan could take care of part of it, why not? And there is also a personal element in Trump's policies. He is, of course, angry about India for not giving him credit in the ceasefire. But the important thing is he's angry with India because he thinks that India was taking Washington for a ride, using America to advance its own issues with China, especially establish its hegemony in South Asia and get all the U.S. technology for its own purposes. So he thought that he can't rely on India for helping fight America's fights. And there is, of course, a broader policy framework, of which Uzair Yunus has also mentioned. The new American approach to South Asia is departure from the previous one that focused far too much on geopolitical rivalry and competition with China, of which the policy towards South Asia was a derivative. And that policy exclusively relied on India's centrality to U.S. strategic interests in the region. And coupled with India's policy of maximum isolation of Pakistan, this policy was beginning to alienate Pakistan. The net result was that Pakistan, an important strategic partner of China, was being allowed or compelled to get closer to China. And that was not really a desirable thing from American point of view. So President Trump perhaps feels that rather than punishing and isolating Pakistan at India's behest, which will only advance India's interests and not help American interests, it would be better to seek an entry in Pakistan and see if it can direct relationship with Pakistan, can put limits on Pakistan-China cooperation. I think that seems to be the main factor. Trump's new approach to South Asia is also not because of Trump's own view of geopolitics. For him, geopolitics matters, but is subordinate or adapted to economic interests of America. He knows America can retain its economic primacy only in a globalized economy, and there is no global economy without China, Russia, or even India. So the relation with Pakistan may be a small part of that effort, giving him leverage in relation with China and India. I think that is very important. In India, he seeks greater market access. That's very important. The public is too much focused on his personal element, but that is also there. But I think he truly needs greater market access in India. And he would also like China to agree to a managed global competition with the U.S. And he's looking forward to the prospective meeting with Xi. And till then, he's trying to sort of conciliate China by sidelining India. So that has a purpose. So relations with India is undergoing an apparent change because of many factors, not just because India did not accept America's role in the ceasefire. That, of course, is there. Personal element was also there. And then in Pakistan, Trump also sees prospects for investment, especially in oil exploration, rare earth minerals, and IT and cryptocurrency. So I think there are many factors which are sort of bringing Pakistan and the United States closer. An advice to Pakistan, Pakistan must watch these developments and remain alert to what Trump may demand in future. That could force Pakistan to confront painful strategic choices. Let's not forget there has been a serious trust deficit between U.S. and Pakistan. The relationship has historically been marked by many contradictions between the U.S. and Pakistani interests and policies, contradictions between the relationship, each of one of them, Pakistan and U.S., with other countries, notably between the U.S.-India relationship and Pakistan-China relationship. It's a very complex relationship. And lastly, the U.S. need for Pakistan has always been temporary, while Pakistan seeks a long-term economic support and security assistance. Thirdly, Pakistan's concerns are regional and U.S. interests are global. And if I could also mention that there is an element of inconsistency and lack of continuity in the U.S. relation with Pakistan. On top of all that, historical baggage besides Trump, whose policies remain very personalized, whose future is hazy to say the least. Not to mention there are contradictions among different aspects of Trump's foreign policy agenda and within the foreign policy and between foreign and domestic policy. So basically, we are talking here of many uncertainties in the future, and I would advise Pakistan to remain alert to those possibilities.
Right, and that's a good point because, although you said that the India relationship is downgraded, I suspect that Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro's comments aren't exactly making that recovery easier. But you did mention the question of strategic choices, and I want to bring our final question to the subject of China, because I don't think I would be amiss in saying China is perhaps Pakistan's most important international relationship at present. And, well, you did mention that Trump wants to manage the strategic rivalry with China, but perhaps given the consensus that the U.S.-China relationship on a long term might be on a somewhat downward trajectory, do you believe this warming in U.S.-Pakistan relations is sustainable given Pakistan's iron brotherhood with China? How does Pakistan intend to balance its relationships with the U.S. and China? And how do you see Pakistan's long-term engagement with both superpowers evolving as their strategic rivalry continues to intensify?
Tushar, you have raised another very valid question, which I mean, as far as I understand, is uppermost on the mind of Pakistan policymakers. I must say they remain aware of these possibilities. The fact is that Pakistan needs both China and the U.S. and sort of remains concerned whether their rivalry will bring it to a position where it may have to make a choice. If you had asked me this question during President Biden's time, my answer would have been different because Biden was so obsessed with Indo-Pacific strategy that he saw Pakistan only through that single lens. Trump doesn't see Pakistan through a single lens. I think, although I cannot really speak with authority as to what his real foreign policy objectives and interests in South Asia are, but it looks, going by analysis of the past policies, U.S. is interested in Pakistan's stability, and so should be Trump, because an unstable Pakistan would foster militancy and there's always a talk of danger to its nuclear assets, although it's exaggerated, and also risk of Pakistan-India conflict. U.S. might see China's economic ties with Pakistan helpful up to a point, to the extent that it can contribute to Pakistan's stability. Washington is also, of course, as I mentioned before, interested in Pakistan due to counterterrorism, and that interest is shared by China as well. So I think there are certain shared interests as well. China has vital interests in strategic partnership with Pakistan, so it's interested in Pakistan's economic viability and political stability, and it knows the IMF's value to Pakistan's struggling economy, for which there is no early exit, because China doesn't want to assume the role of a sole rescuer of Pakistan, as it might ease Pakistan into a position of dependency and de-incentivize it from undertaking critical structural reforms. So IMF's help can only be gotten if countries are really on the right side of America. So I think Pakistan-America connection helps China also in an indirect way. And as I mentioned before, strategic ties with China remain very vital to Pakistan, but it still needs good relations with the United States. Having said that, there is areas of conflict of interest between China and the United States. And as you said, it depends how intense that rivalry, U.S.-China rivalry becomes. And I am proceeding on the basis that I think Xi-Trump meeting might discover some modus vivendi, and it might not make that rivalry any more intense than it is now. And it's not going to be like either you are with us or with them type of thing. But let's hope it doesn't get that. But whatever the case, there are potential areas of conflict, regardless of how this U.S.-China rivalry turns out, whether it's moderated or it becomes more intense. Because Washington's tolerance of Pakistan relations with China has certain limits. Because if you look at it in the long term, Pakistan has literally become the sole strategic partner of China in Asia, serving the latter's interests not only South Asia, but potentially enabling China to sidestep the U.S. and its allied naval dominance across Indo-Pacific. So this has a direct impact on America's Indo-Pacific strategy. And by the way, this strategy has not been abandoned yet. It has been sidestepped for now or put in the back burner, but it's very much there, and it could be revived in some shape or form. So the United States remains concerned about possible role that Pakistan could play and India-Pakistan tensions could play in affecting India's capability to help the United States in the Indo-Pacific strategy. Idea is to remain engaged in Pakistan, to induce it not to undermine this strategy. The bottom line is Pakistan needs both China and the U.S., and the purpose of each would be served better if Pakistan was engaged with both. Just to sum up, for Pakistan's relationship with China is indispensable, but it's not enough. The relationship with the U.S. is necessary, but not dispensable. So Pakistan does have challenges. I would close by giving you this imagery. It's like Pakistan riding two boats, but the problem is two boats are in a boat race. That makes it uncertain, if not a hazardous ride. Whether Pakistan can navigate it successfully will largely depend, in my view, on Pakistan's internal strength, political stability, and the quality of leadership, which can enable Pakistan to cope all these challenges more effectively without being dependent on any power.
That was Ambassador Touqir Hussain, who gave us an excellent overview of the history and evolution of Pakistan's foreign policy priorities over its nearly 8 decades of existence. But coming to the more recent dynamic in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, the revival of U.S.-Pakistan ties comes as a bit of a surprise given their recent history. Remember, this is just a few months after the U.S.-Pakistan relationship had reached an all-time low during the Biden presidency. when Pakistan had helped the Taliban come back to power in Afghanistan after siphoning more than $35 billion from the United States during its 20-year-long war on terror. This is something that Donald Trump himself had pointed out in 2018. Quote, "The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools." Well, so how has Pakistan managed to weave its way back into his good books while maintaining an alliance with the United States' greatest strategic rival, China? Ambassador Husain Haqqani joins us to break this down. Husain Haqqani is a senior fellow and director for South and Central Asia at Hudson Institute. Ambassador Haqqani served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States from 2008 to 2011 and has a distinguished career in government, having served as advisor to 4 Pakistani prime ministers. He's the author of 4 books: Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, India versus Pakistan, Reimagining Pakistan, and most relevant for this conversation, Magnificent Delusions, Pakistan, the United States, and an Epic History of Misunderstanding. So, Ambassador Haqqani, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you on Beyond the Indus. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
Great. So, Ambassador Haqqani, before we begin, I happened to watch your recent interview with a certain Indian news channel, and I believe you were making some interesting points, but the way the conversation went, I don't think you had a chance to complete that point. So I do want to ask you that, post Pahalgam, it seems that India and Pakistan seem to be shouting past each other without any real dialogue. And I wonder, what do you think isn't getting through to each side in their understanding about the other side? How would you assess both countries' current strategies to engage with each other, and how could each side improve their approach?
Tushar, it's a good question. Basically, shouting is never good for dialogue anywhere. And the interview you referred to was also a function of that very phenomenon. Instead of letting the other person complete their thoughts, there's a tendency these days to make a point that you've already decided you wanted to make. That stops people from listening to each other. Pakistanis seriously do not understand that India, which used to be always willing to talk to Pakistan from 1947 until 2008, has been affected by events such as the Mumbai terrorist attacks. Terrorism matters to Indians, and they feel angry over the fact that they haven't been able to get terrorism to be shut off. The Indians don't understand that Pakistan is not a monolith. Pakistan is a country of multiple nationalities, of people with different perspectives. Yes, the military controls the polity, but at the same time, there are people within Pakistan who certainly have different perspectives on things. So, for many years, Pakistani school children were taught that India is a permanent enemy. That was wrong. I have always been very critical of that phenomenon. But what I'm sensing now is that a lot of Indians have convinced themselves that Pakistan is a permanent enemy. Neighbors cannot afford to be permanent enemies. Most neighbors in history have fought with each other for long periods of time, only eventually to understand that trading with one another, visiting one another, doing business with one another is something that is inevitable for them. There is something that Indians and Pakistanis both need to understand. Until 1947, South Asia was the most integrated region of the world. From Myanmar all the way to Afghanistan, there was a single currency that functioned. There was a single telephone grid, telegraph grid, banking system. Trains went from one side to the other. All that has changed. Today, when every other region is far more integrated, South Asia has become the least integrated region of the world. Just to give you an example, almost half of the trade of North American countries, Canada, United States, Mexico, is with one another. Europe, a very significant portion of Europe's trade is with one another. ASEAN, the same. Latin America, similar. And what is the situation in South Asia? South Asia is the least economically integrated region. There is very little trade. Only a very small percentage of trade of each of those nations is with one another. You can't fly from Karachi to Kathmandu without coming to either Doha or Dubai. You can't go from India to Pakistan easily. And that is something that will not be conducive to the interests of any of the countries in the region. So Pakistanis need to understand Indians are angry over terrorism. Indians need to understand that anger should not blind them to the need for eventually settling into a normal relationship with Pakistan.
Coming to the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, while reading your book, Magnificent Delusions, I was really fascinated by how Pakistan's determination, to secure an alliance with the U.S., it worked out despite, at least in the 50s, several rebuffs, at least during the Truman administration. And through then, that partnership has endured through all its ups and downs through the decades. How would you characterize the U.S.-Pakistan relationship overall, and particularly how it's changed and evolved over the years? Is there something about Pakistan's diplomatic approach or its institutional setup that has made its diplomatic relationship with the U.S. so resilient and adaptable?
We must understand that when Pakistan was created, it got only 19% of British India's population, 17% of its revenue sources, but 33% of its army. So the army became dominant very early on. Armies always approach things through standard operating procedures and methods. And Pakistan developed a method of dealing with the United States early on. The bureaucracy also felt the need for the United States immediately after independence to fill that gap between resources and maintaining such a large army and bureaucracy. So Pakistan's approach has always been to try and find ways to satisfy those who are dealing with the foreign relations. And Pakistanis understand that an entire country does not deal with foreign relations. Even if every American in Montana likes India or Pakistan, that doesn't really matter. What matters is the people who deal with the South Asian region in the Department of State, National Security Council, the U.S. military, and the U.S. intelligence services, and possibly now increasingly in the Department of Treasury. So the Pakistanis understood that, and they always work to try and give small wins to the Americans and asking for small returns as well. For all the hype, Pakistan has not got too much for its relationship with the United States. It got economic assistance, it got military equipment as it needed. But none of its major accomplishments. For example, Pakistanis take pride in their nuclear program. The nuclear program was accomplished against America's wishes. So the American-Pakistani relationship was always transactional. Americans are transactional by nature, and Pakistan understood the transactional nature. India, on the other hand, wants a philosophical relationship. We are the largest democracy. You are the oldest democracy. There has to be a philosophical connection. We have shared values. Pakistan's elite, at least, has never tried to live with any such pretensions. And so therefore, when the chips are down and a practical outcome is being sought, people always prefer the transactional to the philosophical.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I do agree to some extent that there seems to be a trend in Indian foreign policy where our strategy seems to be to proclaim India's magnificence and expect the world to come beckoning. And I feel like there has to be a more targeted approach. And we're seeing some of that, particularly right now in this surprising shift in U.S.-India and U.S.-Pakistan relations. Ambassador Haqqani, you've been ambassador during some of the most critical moments in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, including major incidents like the Mumbai attack. I think it was around the Osama bin Laden. No, that was in 2013.
No, 2011. That was while I was ambassador.
Precisely. So you've seen the relationship at its ups and downs, and you've also seen India's growing partnership with the United States at the same time after that. But as things stand today, Pakistan has emerged with one of the most favorable tariff rates in the world, while India is slapped with one of the highest. So my question is, how is Pakistan, a country that, in my opinion, actively undermined the US's war on terror in Afghanistan, that has an ironclad alliance with its great strategic rival China, and where anti-Americanism still seems to be fairly popular, how has Pakistan managed to reestablish its trust with the US while India has failed to do so? What lessons do you think India could learn from Pakistan's handling of the US?
First of all, I don't agree that a relationship of trust has been created between Pakistan and the United States. I think what has happened is that a transactional relationship that went south for a while after the discovery of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan has gone back to being a transactional relationship with slightly better atmospherics. On the other hand, India went too far, or India's current leaders went too far in proclaiming a close relationship with certain leaders of the United States. And now President Trump, for whom Prime Minister Modi went to the extent of saying up ki baar Trump Sarkar, has come back, and his tariff strategy was very important to him, but that importance was not fully understood by the Indian side. Second, I think that proclaiming one's greatness at home is never a problem, but when you start believing it in your interaction with others, then you have two consequences. One is you are either dismissive of their concerns, or B, you have an assumption that because we are so great, everybody will always acknowledge our greatness. And so there's been a bit of a wake-up call from the United States on that issue to India's policymakers and leaders now. Will they wake up? I'm not too sure. There is still this tendency among India's spokespersons, India's interlocutors with the rest of the world to kind of express anger rather than humility over other people's concerns about Indian policies. So I think that India's tendency not to be humble on the global stage, but always be one that proclaims one's greatness, that has worked to India's disadvantage. And Pakistan's willingness to feign humility while doing exactly what it wants to do, and also pretending, for example, in Magnificent Delusions, I'm sure you read the chapter about Pakistan's nuclear program and General Ziaul Haq's feigning shock at it. I mean, there's no way that he, as the dictator of the country, didn't know what was happening, but he was always willing to pretend that it wasn't happening. And he was always willing to act very humbly with the Americans and saying, oh, of course, if you want to check this. Now, an American in a situation like that would turn around and say, how dare you even think of accusing us of something like that? And so, therefore, the Americans find the Pakistani approach easier to deal with than the Indian approach. And that's how all of this has played out. I would say the fundamentals all favor India. India is the bigger market. India is the bigger source of investment and a destination for investment. Pakistan is not any of that. So in a way, it is an artificial comparison, India versus Pakistan, in economic matters. The gap is too wide. Now, in military matters, Pakistan has always invested in its military and has managed always to, if not hold India at bay, at least to make sure that there is always a draw. There has never been, except 1971 and the loss of East Pakistan, India has never had a clear military advantage vis-a-vis Pakistan that everybody recognizes universally. So, given that situation, again, long-term, India has more money, has more resources to invest in its military, and if it really starts modernizing its military, which it hasn't done sufficiently, it would have a huge advantage over Pakistan. But from Pakistan's point of view, they have done reasonably well in having a relationship with the United States. And since many Indians have fallen victim to what used to be a Pakistani problem, which is constantly comparing with Pakistan, whether critically or negatively, but still, in that sense, they have sort of got bragging rights.
Right. And you mentioned the military, and you've often commented, at great risk to yourself, about the outsized role that the military has played in Pakistan's foreign policy. How would you assess the military intelligence establishment's influence in determining Pakistan's foreign policy objectives? And to what extent are they at odds with or detrimental to the civilian government's priorities? Do you see any realistic scenario where the military would, withdraw completely or partially from foreign policy decision making, leaving it to just the civilians?
I don't see that happening. There was a time when I thought that it was possible. I've written about it. I played a role in trying to have that scenario come to pass. But I think that many failings of the Pakistani political class, as well as Pakistani civilians in general, the military's general cohesion, the ability to do everything in a disciplined manner, confers an advantage on it that simply is not being overcome at this point. What happens in the future, distant future, I cannot say. The reason why the Pakistan military got involved in foreign policy making was, again, because of how Pakistan started out. The military was a reality. It was a big institution. It had a presence all across the country. The northwestern headquarters of the British Indian Army were located in Rawalpindi. That became Pakistan's general headquarters, large army. And now the military's first concern was, how do we get resources for ourselves? None of the civilian leaders at that time thought that they should actually consider diminishing the size of the military. That came from the Pakistani civilian leaders' choice soon after 1947 to perpetuate Pakistan's conflict with India. Pakistan was created on the notion of a incompatibility between Hindus and Muslims. And so then that was carried forward into an incompatibility between Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan. Now, India's early leaders, as you know, were very secular and did not like being described as Hindu India. They said India is a multi-religious, multicultural, multi-ethnic country. India is India, and it's not going to be cast only as representative of one religion. So that made the Pakistani task difficult. But the Pakistani military, in its pursuit of share of resources, ended up getting more and more involved with foreign policy. For example, when some people wanted non-alignment, the Pakistan military pointed out, but then in that case, how will we get economic or military assistance, which was at that time available only from the United States. And slowly, the military's worldview evolved, but it also started becoming dominant. Now the military controls the narrative inside Pakistan. The average Pakistani, or a large section of Pakistan's population, shares its worldview. They see India as a permanent enemy. They see Pakistan as the leader of the Islamic world, or potential leader of the Islamic world. They see nuclear weapons as Pakistan's greatest source of pride. And many of them are willing to even reject the idea of their own economic prosperity for this what I call hyper-nationalism. And that all helps the military maintain its preeminence, if not dominance. And I don't think any of the civilian leaders at this moment are willing to challenge it. Those who used to challenge it, like the Pakistan People's Party and the Pakistan Muslim League, they have both joined the government right now without confronting the military, because their worry is that Imran Khan and his party, which was propped up by the military, created by the military, that will become a threat to these traditional parties. Imran Khan's fight with the military is not over the narrative. It's not over foreign policy or any of the other elements of the military's worldview. It is only over the fact that the current leadership of the military does not like him and understands that he's a threat to them because of his erratic and mercurial personality. So it's more a personality fight than an intellectual or an ideological one. And under such circumstances, where is the challenge to the military's worldview, the military's basic philosophy that governs Pakistan's foreign policy? Where would it come from? I don't see any quota. People like me, we can write, we can speak, but our views are not necessarily the views that are going to shape policy in a country like Pakistan.
So that's a really interesting point you made. And I want to bring it back to a point you made during the aforementioned interview, where you said that the military doesn't have a big red button through which to launch terrorists at India. You have to work with these groups in your country. And I think this is a point that a lot of Indian analysts can understand, because whether you talk about, Punjab in the 80s or Assam or even the Maoist separate movement, politicians in that area have had to work with groups that are, launch attacks at the Indian state. But if I might add that the long-term goal in that was always to integrate them within the democratic process. The idea of sustaining them was we had to diminish them in the long term, or India had to. The reason I ask about the military's role in foreign policy is because I suspect the idea on the Indian side is that a lot of these groups, there is no genuine commitment to diminishing them, but rather using them as, let's say, potential assets, the death by a thousand cuts narrative, to launch at India at some point. So there's no genuine commitment. So I want to ask you, do you agree with this narrative that the military's role in foreign policy might have something to do with the continuing presence of or tolerance of certain terrorist groups? And secondly, would Saun's military influence, do you think, what would be the difference in Pakistan's, let's say, regional and foreign policy approach? And would there be a difference in the support for groups, or would it be the same?
I think that the militant groups, the jihadi groups, the terrorist groups, they were cultivated by the military. And many of them have got their own support bases, however limited they might be. If you remember very early on, one of the most important groups used to be Hizbul Mujahideen, which was connected to Jamaat-e-Islami, which has existed in Pakistan's polity for a long time, getting up to 2, 3, 4% of the votes in elections. So what we have seen is only a more harder line groups emerging as time goes on, and that happens with ideological movements. We saw that with Marxists, which ended up having many variations from Trotskyists to Maoists, etc. So to ignore all of that and think that this is all some general or colonel sitting there and running it like a orchestra conductor, does not recognize the ground reality fully. That said, of course, there is an orchestra conductor, and there is assistance. And when it is turned off, things become better. When it's turned on, things become worse. But again, the management of that should be the target, rather than the assumption that just by not talking, not having to do anything with the other, we will somehow isolate them internationally sufficiently. Look, a country with 240 million people with nuclear weapons is rather difficult to isolate. I mean, it's not easy to isolate countries in a multipolar world. It's very interesting. India has always championed multipolarity. And the interesting thing about multipolarity is that everybody looks at their own interests. So if there are 193 countries in the world that are members of the United Nations, each one has some agency and some interests. And you can persuade a vast majority of them, you can persuade the most influential of them, but there will always be some others that are persuadable in the other direction. So this strategy of isolating Pakistan and somehow forcing Pakistan to completely give up the jihadi option, I think hasn't worked. And I think Americans have recognized that, which is why after the Taliban's return to power and after expressing displeasure with Pakistan's role in that entire exercise, they've gone back to Pakistan saying, okay, now how do we talk to these Taliban? How do we deal with some of the problems? And a similar approach may have to be taken by India. And the fact that it's not done is because I think there's a psychological barrier here. We can do that with extremists and terrorists on the eastern side of India, but we can't do that with those on the western side. And some of these jihadi groups will have to be diminished militarily. But again, they would have to be diminished militarily cooperatively, and there would have to be some interest in Pakistan that is willing to do that. Now, what is the big difference between Pakistan's civilian leaders' views and the military? If you remember, during the government of President Asif Ali Zardari, serious efforts were made to try and crush some of the jihadi groups. Others arose in their stead. People say that the process was a result of the Pakistani intelligence service shifting its support. Maybe, but we don't really have conclusive evidence of that. Then Nawaz Sharif took the position that Pakistan needs to start cracking down on these various jihadi groups. And some steps were taken, enough to get Pakistan off the FATF grey list. But again, not enough to solve the problem. So I think that the problem will be solved over a relatively longer period of time than is envisaged by some people in India.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif just before the Dawn leaks, where he confronted the military, and that didn't work out too well for him, which is why I'm wondering about, the distinction between, let's say, civilian-led and a military-led foreign policy.
But that's moot now, because I think that most civilians in Pakistan have kind of reconciled to the fact that the best they can do is have a share of power with the military, and therefore it comes at too high a personal cost to try and continue to confront the military. So if another configuration domestically arises in which there is potential for that, some new political leadership emerges that is willing to do that and is also willing to actually offer a different worldview, I'm sure you and I will both applaud that. But at this moment, I don't see that happening.
Indeed. And lastly, I wonder if you've heard about Field Marshal Asim Munir's, I believe it was a private dinner in Florida, where he made some rather interesting comments. He compared India to either a shining Mercedes or Ferrari. I think the accounts differ. And he compared Pakistan to a dump truck on a highway. And I suppose the implication was that one of Pakistan's foreign policy goals was to be an immovable obstacle to India's ambitions. I wonder what you make of Munir's comments and what they might imply about Pakistan's approach towards India.
Tushar, I have written in my book, Reimagining Pakistan, that Pakistan needs a national purpose other than just confrontation with or opposition to India. These remarks, if they were made, seem to indicate that at least some people in the higher echelons of power in Pakistan actually do not understand that. They are willing to acknowledge that the prosperity of Pakistan is not their objective. It's not that we will make that dumpster truck into a Toyota Corolla first and then eventually try to become a Mercedes ourselves. It is being a dumpster truck works for us because if nothing else, at least it is a good way to destroy the Mercedes that might be coming on the other side. It's a negative approach. It's a zero-sum approach. It's a hateful approach. I don't think that it will work to the advantage of the people of Pakistan. And the change that you and I have been talking about, when will it come? When will Pakistanis actually have a different view that can be part of national policy is when people start feeling that all of this, in the beginning, it's very easy. When you start with a hateful enterprise, it's very easy to convince people, we are poor, we are unhappy, but we are going to put up with it because we are going to see the other side come to its knees. And later on, at some point, people turn around and say, but why do I need to be poor? Why do I need to be unhappy? Why does my situation not improve? Going back to a famous phrase that was once uttered, Pakistan's then leader, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, had said, we will eat grass to make nuclear weapons. Many years later, he was asked, what do you think about having said that? He said, yes, I've been talking to my people, and not many people are willing to eat grass. Unfortunately, Pakistan did acquire nuclear weapons, but the choice for Pakistanis should not be between eating grass and keeping the nuclear arsenal. It should be between having a prosperous country, having a shining Mercedes of our own, and a shining Mercedes that rides the same highway as the shining Mercedes of our neighboring countries, rather than one that wishes to just ram itself into the other and destroy it.
So no hopes for rapprochement in your view?
Right now, not so much, partly also because the Indian side also is irreconcilable right now. Look, let's be honest. The leadership of India at this moment, the BJP, derives a lot of support from a historical narrative of grievance against the Muslim conquerors of India. And it's very easy to try and divert that towards Pakistan and say, if Pakistan is the Muslim state and India is the Hindu state, then the two of us have an eternal conflict. And any concessions that you want us to make will not be made until you come on your knees. So basically, it's mirror images of similar phenomenon. Look, from 1947 to about 2014, Pakistan was where the two-nation theory of these two communities that for thousands of years lived together, being irreconcilable, was espoused. Now, the two-nation theory is espoused also in India. So in a situation like that, unfortunately, I see conflict lasting longer than I would like to see it.
That was fascinating. Ambassador Haqqani, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure talking to you.
That was Ambassador Husain Haqqani giving us his refreshingly honest perspectives on the US, India, Pakistan triangle. But let's turn our focus now to the Trump administration. President Trump's second term has been marked by a radical shift in his foreign policy priorities, and the United States' new approach has alienated a number of key allies, not just India, but also Japan and South Korea and the EU. To help us understand President Trump's new foreign policy approach, the people advising him, and the long-term implications for the US-India partnership as well as its relations with Pakistan, we're joined by Michael Kugelman. So we're happy to welcome back a friend of the podcast, Michael Kugelman. Michael is Senior Fellow at the Asia Pacific Foundation in Vancouver and leading specialist on Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, and their relations with the United States. He's also a columnist for the Foreign Policy magazine and one of the world's leading South Asia analysts. So we're incredibly grateful to have him with us again to discuss these new realignments in relations between the US, India, and Pakistan. Michael, it's great to have you on again.
Thank you. Great to be back with you.
So, Michael, it's been an incredibly busy few months in South Asian politics and foreign policy. Lately, we're seeing some incredible visuals coming out of the SCO summit, and I'd love to get to that at some point. But I'd like to start with Pakistan and the United States. You know, I doubt anyone could have predicted the current state of India-US relations just a few months into Trump 2.0. But what's also interesting is the comeback that Pakistan has made in its relationship with the United States. You know, Trump had earlier singled out Pakistan for its double dealing with the US during the war on terror, but all that seems to have been forgotten with Pakistan securing an incredibly favorable tariff rate of 19% and a multi-billion-dollar trade and investment deal. I guess my question is, how did Pakistan achieve this? You know, what exactly did its negotiators promise in DC to secure such a deal? And how realistic are these commitments for multi-billion-dollar, oil and minerals deals, especially with China, a big player in that region?
It really is extraordinary. I mean, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is one that's had its ups and downs. So in that sense, in principle, one should not necessarily have ruled out some type of improvement in ties, given that, since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, the trajectory of U.S.-Pakistan ties had been pretty negative. But because it's been a roller coaster, why not think that things could get better? But, I would argue that one would not have expected things at all to get better. One main reason for that is, as you noted, President Trump himself, as well as other senior officials in this administration, have been very hard on Pakistan. They've been harsh critics of Pakistan in the past, and also some of the few issues that formed the pillars of cooperation during the Biden years, things like climate change, clean energy, development cooperation, those were clearly not the priorities for the Trump administration, especially after it suspended most foreign assistance and dismantled USAID. Those are big components of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Anyway, so we would not have expected things to get to where they are now. So why? Why have we seen this surprising turnaround in U.S.-Pakistan relations? I would argue that, first of all, Pakistan did something that it's done before very successfully. There's a pattern of this over the course of U.S.-Pakistan relations. It's been able to successfully pitch itself to Washington as a useful partner on the issues that interest the administration the most. And so with the current Trump administration, Pakistan knows that the president and his administration view foreign policy and international relations largely through certainly transactional, but also commercial lenses. So, Pakistan knows that critical minerals, cryptocurrency, things like that are of great interest to the Trump administration. It's driven some of the administration's policies and on issues as varied as Greenland and Ukraine and Myanmar, quite frankly. So Pakistan knew that it had something to offer on that, or it thought that it had something to offer. So this is why the Pakistanis dangled this tantalizing opportunity to work with Pakistan to unearth what Pakistan describes as its $1 trillion worth of critical minerals. It also said that it can work with the U.S. on crypto issues. Pakistan had nothing going on crypto at all until, not coincidentally, shortly after the second Trump administration took office, Pakistan formed a crypto council, and it began the process of legalizing crypto. The other thing that Pakistan was able to do very well from soon after the Trump administration came back to office is to tap into the personal and family networks of Trump's, which are very important for Trump. So this is why we've seen a crypto company that has two of Trump's sons as a part of it receive engagement from Pakistan's crypto council. So that's it. And also, to take things away from the commercial lens, this administration cares a lot about finding terrorists that have threatened the United States. It may not want deep levels of security cooperation with Pakistan, but it's open to any type of possibility to help the U.S. track down the bad guys. And so Pakistan has pitched itself as a country that can work with the U.S. to track down Islamic State Khorasan terrorists that have threatened the U.S. Pakistan borders Afghanistan. And indeed, it did work with the U.S. early on in the second Trump administration to track down an ISK fighter who we are told was involved in the terrorist attack near the Kabul airport when U.S. Forces were completing their withdrawal. That was an attack that killed a number of U.S. service people. The other thing I'll say to this is that it's not only about these commercial issues. I would argue that as we've gotten more deep into the second Trump administration, the Trump administration has seen some things from Pakistan that I think it appreciates. One is the India-Pakistan conflict, when Pakistan held its own, quite frankly, against India. And I think that the Trump, that's something that the Trump administration would note, that maybe Pakistan's military has more might than many would suggest in the face of a larger country like India. And finally, I would argue that Pakistan has been able to pitch itself as a unique strategic player in the sense that it has very good relations with China, with Russia, and also with Iran. And given all of the various dynamics of international relations in recent months, that's something that would be seen as a positive about Pakistan in the eyes of the administration.
That's really interesting about this idea of Pakistan pitching itself as, having excellent relations with a variety of international players, because supposedly that was something that India prided itself on even a year back, let's say. And, coming to specifically the India-U.S. trade talks, I think one of the most deliberating things in terms of the U.S.-India relationship, because the 50% tariff rate that was slapped on India is the highest in the world. I think only Brazil has an equivalent rate. And it's also kind of a surprising outcome, given that India was one of the first countries to open trade negotiations post-Liberation Day. So a few articles in Reuters and the Wall Street Journal suggest that negotiations were almost finalized, but were held up because of concessions on agriculture and dairy imports, by which time the U.S. had already kind of secured favorable deals with countries like Vietnam and Indonesia. You're in D.C. What's your sense of the timeline of these negotiations and their breaking down? And which side would you paint as more at fault for the failure?
I mean, again, a striking turnaround. As you said, India was one of the first countries to get a head start in the talks. Trump and Modi agreed to start trade talks when Modi was at the White House back in February. And also India made a lot of concessions to the U.S. early on, right? It agreed to reduce a lot of tariffs. It eliminated some of the tariffs that Trump had been fixated on for a long time, like Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And India also has been, the numbers show, it had been increasing its imports of U.S. goods significantly in recent years, including U.S. oil, American oil. And, of course, these are things that Trump wants to see other countries doing, and that helps other countries in their chances of getting a deal. So India was doing all that, but still we got to where we are. So several factors here. One, I would argue that India did put its foot down at the end. The last phases, or the last phase of the trade talks, as the two sides were trying to get to the finish line, India refused to loosen protections in its in some of its most sensitive, politically significant sectors, like agriculture, for example. I mean, farmers in India are an important political constituency, as they are in many countries. The Trump administration wanted the agriculture sector to be opened up to more market access from the U.S., but India essentially said no. I do think it was willing to make, some concessions here and there, but largely it put its foot down. And President Trump, he expects the countries that his administration is negotiating with to essentially accept all of the demands that the U.S. side is making. So I think that's one reason why we didn't get a deal. It frustrated Trump. It's one of, I would argue, several triggers for what I would describe as a sense of grievance on the part of President Trump that's prompted him to take additional harsh steps against India. So that's one thing. So in terms of who is at fault, well, I mean, I think that the Indians did make a lot of concessions earlier on, and it was only at the end when they put their foot down, whereas the Trump administration has taken a maximalist position throughout, essentially expecting India to make concessions across the board. Now, one could argue that, given the stakes and given that India really needs to get a deal to avoid the outcome that would later emerge, that India should have been more willing to make even more concessions. But one could also acknowledge that there could have been significant political risk for India of opening up the agricultural sector to more U.S. market access and investment. I mean, we are talking about a country that, as much as it's urbanized in recent years, its economy is still impacted a great deal by rural sectors, particularly agriculture. You still have a significant number of the Indian labor base that is based in agriculture. So, it's just a really tough thing. But I do think that we have to highlight very briefly the issue of grievance. I mean, as you said, India got 50% tariffs, 25% initially, and then another 25% for its imports of Russian arms and Russian energy. China imports more oil from Russia than India does. It didn't get any tariffs for this. And so here, I think you have to look at the India's unwillingness to make those final concessions to the U.S. You also have to look at, among other things, India's unwillingness to let Trump take credit for playing a role in the India-Pakistan ceasefire, and also something like Trump's invitation to Modi to visit Washington after he had been at the G7 summit in Canada, and for India to decline that invitation. Modi liked to decline that invitation because he knew that if he came, Pakistan's army chief, who was in Washington at the time, that Modi would be in a position where he'd have to, meet with the Pakistan army chief as part of Trump's efforts to try to promote some type of peace between the two countries. Modi and the Indian government would have wanted no part of that. But I do think that in understanding how things have gone from bad to really bad with the U.S. and India, and the trade outcomes that really didn't work out well at all, you have to look at the factor of Trump and his own sense of grievance about how things have played out with India.
Yeah, and I don't think, at least from what I understand, this is only about Russian oil, because as you mentioned, China does import more Russian oil, and the EU and Turkey import gas and oil from them as well. But it's also interesting because the United States has imposed sanctions on Venezuela and Iran as well, which has taken a significant percentage of, I think, 2 of the top 5 oil producers are basically taken off the global market, which China does flout in terms of at least Iran, and it's investing in Venezuela. So it's more than oil, I get a sense of it. And I'm particularly surprised because in addition to the tariff imposition, we've seen a lot of surprisingly aggressive language in India come from U.S. administration figures. I think primarily Peter Navarro, who went as far as to call Russia's invasion of Ukraine Modi's war. What's the reason behind this sudden tone shift? You alluded to this nomination of Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think a report came out in the New York Times a few days ago saying that, yes, this was one of the reasons why Trump had the sense of grievance is because of Modi's refusal. Do you think that is the primary reason for this? And another side of this is the India relationship was supposed to have bipartisan support. What reactions are you hearing in D.C. about this move by the Trump administration, particularly from the Congress and leadership from both the Democrats and Republicans?
Yeah, let me take the last part of the question first. I mean, there's a significant divide here between what we're hearing in terms of rhetoric from the president himself and some of his top advisors, like, as you mentioned, Peter Navarro, and those in the bureaucracy, those, across the interagency community, including at high levels within the State Department and other relevant agencies when it comes to U.S.-India relations, who do not at all like the nature of this rhetoric, are very worried about how this could impact the future of a relationship that they value. So, I think that there's a lot of unhappiness, and we have seen, I mean, this is sort of a big story with the relationship moving forward. We have seen cooperation continue despite all the bad things that are happening in the relationship. As you'll recall, several weeks ago, the two countries launched a joint satellite which reflects space cooperation between the two. U.S. law enforcement, especially the FBI, have arrested a number of individuals that India has long sought, as accused them of being sympathetic to separatist views in India. They support what's known as Khalistan. So this has been a good thing for the relationship, I would argue. And then there was a dialogue between top diplomatic and security officials recently. There are even some recent military exercises between the two. So things are continuing to happen, which suggests that even with all this nasty rhetoric coming from the White House, that the relationship is still doing okay, suggesting that this is not a wide view across Washington to slam the brakes on the relationship. And this then, I think, brings up another issue that those that are sort of driving the relationship right now in a public way, those that have been most loud about it, they're all folks at the White House, and I would argue that they may not have the nuanced understanding of India's foreign policy and the importance of U.S.-India relations. I mean, that's one thing to keep in mind. But in terms of why we're hearing this nasty rhetoric from Navarro and a few others like that, I think on the one hand it's a pressure tactic. I do think that there is a genuine view on the part of Navarro and their ilk that India is driving this war in Russia, because they look at the stats, and they are right that India has dramatically increased its imports of oil from Russia since the Russian invasion. That right before, in the few years before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, India was actually increasing its share of oil imports from the U.S. And interestingly, if you look at the year 2021, which of course was before the year before the invasion, India was the top destination for American oil exports, which is really interesting. So there was a striking shift. And I think that the administration argued that China is importing a lot of oil from Russia, but you didn't see such a sharp upsurge in its imports from Russia right after the invasion. So there's that. And I think that, the Americans hope the White House officials hope that, this criticism will actually serve as an effective pressure tactic to get India to pull back from Russia. But again, not understanding how India functions and not understanding how it thinks about these things, that's not going to work at all. India is the last country that you want to try to pressure hit on, particularly on a sensitive issue like this. And then the final thing I'll say is going back to what I said about the sense of grievance. I think that Trump and his top aides are angry at the Indian government, including Modi, and they feel that he and his government have not treated the U.S. well, and that they have not addressed what the administration views to be reasonable demands, and hence they're comfortable to use India as a punching bag as they take out their frustrations.
Yeah, and maybe coming to, the people around Trump and in Trump's cabinet, we've seen somewhat of a shift in the Trump administration's cabinet advisors from the start of the term. You had people like Mike Waltz, who was considered quite pro-India, and Elon Musk, who seemed to have either been sidelined or booted out, while others like Steve Witkoff and Navarro seem to have gained prominence. I wonder who exactly is advising and influencing Trump on South Asia in particular, but on foreign policy overall. And not to get conspiratorial, but we did see a situation, I believe, in Biden's last few months where his health led to some of his staff taking perhaps a more active role in policymaking and execution. Do you think we're witnessing a similar dynamic playing out with Trump?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, because of the nature of U.S. bureaucracy, it always takes a long time to confirm new senior officials to key posts, and that includes India-focused posts. So I would argue that now, as I was suggesting before, those driving policy toward India and those in Washington most influential vis-a-vis U.S. policy toward India are those that are Trump appointees. They're not experts on U.S.-India relations. They don't have deep experiences on diplomacy and international relations. And so they may not be, they may not have the clearest idea of how to proceed in an effective way. We have an assistant secretary of state for South Asia post that has been vacant. Paul Kapoor, who's a scholar of South Asia, he had his confirmation hearings some weeks ago, but he hasn't been confirmed yet. So there's that. And when you don't have when you have posts like that are empty, it makes it difficult to have someone with the authority to knock on the door of the White House and say, look, this is how we need to do things, not the way you're doing them. But we don't have that right now. So sort of by default, the Peter Navarros of the world will get the most attention in the cloud. Not to mention President Trump very much, he's all about, close personal relationships. So he'll certainly defer to those that he trusts and that are close to him and indeed are his political appointees. There's a useful example here going back a few years. The early weeks of the Biden administration, India suffered through a horrific COVID surge. And, for many days, there was no public statement, no message of condolence, no message of solidarity, no pledge of assistance from anywhere in Washington. And this got the Indian side very upset, wondering, is this really a partner? It turns out that, again, it was bureaucracy. You didn't have enough people in high posts in Washington at that time to say, look, we need to get a message out right away. Anyway, so I think that's one factor. But yeah, I think that for now, those driving U.S. policy toward India are the ones that we hear from the most. Certainly President Trump and those in the White House. I mean, you certainly have some mid-level diplomats at the State Department, not assistant secretary level, but 1-2 levels beyond that, principal, deputy assistant secretary of state level. I think that they're playing a role, but they're temporary. They're in a very temporary role. What to look for here is that we do now know that a gentleman named Sergio Gore has been nominated by President Trump to be his next ambassador to India. He also, interestingly enough, was appointed as special envoy for South Asia. We've never had a special envoy for South Asia position before. Now, Gore is very close to Trump. He's a very trusted aide. He has Trump's ear. So this is very interesting that, assuming he's confirmed, which I imagine he will be as ambassador, you could have someone with tremendous levels of authority, really, with a portfolio that expands across South Asia based in New Delhi. And that could be very interesting. I don't think the rest of the region will like that. I don't think Pakistan will like that. But I think that Mr. Gore, if he's confirmed, and he doesn't need Senate confirmation to take on the special envoy role, I don't think. So one of the most influential people on U.S. policy toward India and South Asia will be someone who is very close to Trump. And, there is a question here. What does this mean for Paul Kapoor, who's been, again, he has been chosen to be the Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia at the State Department? Will there be some sort of overlap, duplication of roles? Will his post be marginalized? We don't know now, but I think that's important to keep in mind moving forward.
Right. And I just want to add to that because we've seen there have been some reports of, for instance, Marco Rubio, who has gone to Trump with a potential trade deal, but the reporting said that it was Trump that repudiated it because he conditioned that on reducing purchases of Russian oil. So I do wonder if the premise of the previous question was, are other people influencing Trump to go more negative on India? But perhaps the question should be, is there an intransigence coming from Trump directly that has to be overcome?
Yeah, that's a good point. And Rubio is actually an important figure to highlight. I'm glad you brought him up because he has been influential. I mean, he clearly is someone that the president really trusts because he's serving as both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor right now. Even though the NSC has been slashed in terms of staff, and Rubio, along with the vice president, were really leading the front on issues during the India-Pakistan conflict to work the phones with New Delhi and with Islamabad, for that matter. So so Rubio does have that influence, but I don't know to what extent he's been successful if he's tried to get the White House and these key advisors like Navarro to tone down the rhetoric. I mean, clearly, if he's tried, he hasn't been successful because the rhetoric has not ended.
Right, and maybe coming back to Pakistan and India, Field Marshal now Asim Munir has secured promotion since his diplomatic win over India, and this might signal a more perhaps active and bellicose policy towards India as compared to his predecessor Bajwa. Munir has already made several aggressive speeches to this effect. I believe he even issued a nuclear threat from U.S. soil last month, and he's directly threatened Indian businessmen and infrastructure. So how do you see Pakistan's policy towards India under Munir, and how will the U.S. react to potential escalation and attacks in the future? And on the other end, do you think that perhaps there are signs that this might lead to a shift in India's approach to Pakistan or China as a result of the deterioration of the U.S. partnership?
It was always interesting. If you look at the institution of the Pakistan military, that has been the source of some of the most harsh, draconian, and punishing policies toward India. And particularly, it's, given it's the military and the intelligence, what many in Pakistan euphemistically refer to as a security establishment, that's been driving policies such as those that entail sponsoring and sheltering terrorists that have targeted India. But at the same time, it's also within the military where you've had some of the best hopes of a peace process, right? I mean, this happened most recently during the Pervez Musharraf era, when there were plans to launch some type of peace process, but then that all ended when you had the Mumbai terrorist attack, which was, of course, carried out by Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistan-sponsored anti-India terror group. So Munir is interesting. He's very different from most of his immediate predecessors, and in fact, most of his predecessors. He's not very westernized. He's never studied or been based in the U.S. I don't believe he has family here. He's never taken advantage of the opportunities to pursue studies or training in the U.S. He's never studied at a U.S. military academy, unlike many of his predecessors. And he also is, as I understand it, more religious than is typically the case for Pakistani army chiefs and military leaders more broadly. Has that shaped his view of India? I don't know, maybe so, but I do think we need to. It is important just to note that some of the charged rhetoric that he's put out there about India, particularly, and he said that Kashmir is Pakistan's jugular vein. This is not new for not just Pakistani military leaders, but also civilian leaders. I mean, there's always going to be harsh rhetoric and against India. Now, yes, I mean, the nuclear threat that he issued while speaking to diaspora members in Tampa in Florida, yes, I mean, that's significant. But I don't necessarily see Munir as someone that is all the more harsh toward India, at least in rhetoric and tone, than other predecessors of his have been. And he actually, but I would also say that he's dealt with some challenges domestically that most Pakistani army chiefs did not have to deal with, right? Because of domestic political developments and the imprisonment of Imran Khan and so on. He and the military had suffered significant levels of criticism from the public, which is very unusual in Pakistan. So, the military was dealing with some credibility matters, which are unusual. So one could argue that, what can help your cause if you're a Pakistani politician or a Pakistani official who is political, like the army chief is because of their power? Well, I mean, railing against India will certainly help your cause. And I think that Munir actually got a gift with this recent conflict with India because it enabled him and the military to sort of promote this rally around the flag effect, drew the entire nation behind the military to fend off India. And given that Pakistan actually, it did hold its own, and indeed it shot down several Indian jets, I think that's brought him back some popularity. So, I would also argue that, it's been stated by many scholars that Pakistan, to an extent, Pakistan's military derives its legitimacy from this idea of an evergreen and even existential Indian threat, in the sense that you need a strong, powerful, politically involved Pakistani military to be there to serve as a safeguard to protect the country against this Indian threat. And so if any any Pakistani army chief were suddenly to say, okay, let's extend an olive branch and try to make this relationship work, that could really impact it could really make it more difficult for the Pakistani military to justify its outsized role in politics and policy. Again, several military officials, including Pervez Musharraf, are willing to push for peace. but that is unusual. But given where the relationship is now between India and Pakistan, it's going to be in a deep freeze for a while. The last conflict was especially intense, the most serious exchange of hostilities since 1971. And given all these other punitive measures that India has taken against Pakistan, including holding in abeyance the Indus Waters Treaty, I think that the field marshal, as he's known as now, he is not going to relent, in the sense that we cannot expect him to back down from this confrontational policy toward India, just because of how the relationship is playing out.
Right. And just to add to that, you talked about the legitimacy of the military, and one would imagine that the military's legitimacy primarily ought to derive from, keeping the state secure. And the Eastern Front for Pakistan doesn't seem to me so much of a problem as compared to its Western regions. I mean, with the issue in Balochistan as well as TDP. So is there not a dent to Munir or the military's credibility when the situations in those two provinces deteriorate? Does that not challenge, his vision of the military being the, guarantor of Pakistan's security?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, one could argue that, it's very easy to push back against that argument because, yeah, I mean, the Pakistani military has really struggled to fend off these terrorist threats that have plagued Pakistan for quite some time. Now, of course, the narrative in Pakistan is that this has been sort of foisted on Pakistan by the U.S. global war on terror. But that's an argument you could make right after 9/11, but you can't make that argument now when there's, of course, no U.S. presence and there's no U.S.-led war in Afghanistan. You don't really have much of a U.S.-Pakistan security relationship right now. Yes, but not only that, I mean, I would argue that you have significant levels of anti-army sentiment in areas of Pakistan that have faced the most terrorism, because in their view, Pakistan is essentially not protecting the folks that are most targeted by terrorism. In fact, innocents are getting dragged into this, this effort by Pakistan to go after all the bad guys, so to speak. And, this then gets into some of the longer standing policies of the Pakistani military. It's scorched earth tactics against terrorism, as well as the dirty war, so to speak, waged in Balochistan over many years of an insurgency there, in which you had forced disappearances, abductions, that type of thing. And so we've seen pretty large protest in Balochistan against the Pakistani military. This has also happened in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, nearly in northwest Pakistan, where people are very angry at the Pakistanis' military policies as well. So yes, I think that it's easy to make that argument that maybe Pakistan's military does not deserve that mantle of the nation's top safeguard or protector. But this also gets into issues about the civilians subservient to the military, in the sense that one of these strong narratives from the Pakistan military is that you can't trust the civilians to provide security. I mean, they don't say this overtly, but that's the implication. And so I think the view there is that the civilians don't have the capacity to protect you. We do. We may not be flawless, but we can do the job better than the civilians can.
Right. And coming to, let's say, the long-term India-U.S. partnership. Now, how do you see this current spat, whenever it ends, how do you see this altering the long-term trajectory of the U.S.-India partnership? While the fundamentals of the relationship are still present, do you think this might impact the future of certain initiatives like in the U.S.-India global cooperation, like the Quad, for instance, friend-shoring arms purchases? And another aspect of this I'm pretty interested in is you see some worrying signs in the spike in anti-Indian sentiment among some sections of the once pro-India Republican MAGA base. Might this lead to long-term impacts on America's view of and relationship with India?
Yeah, it's definitely, we can't sugarcoat this. I mean, this is the worst crisis the U.S. and India have faced over the entire period of their current strategic partnership, which I would argue has extended more than 20 years. I published a piece in the Indian Express newspaper recently, which I said that there's a multifaceted partnership with a multifaceted crisis, in the sense that, across the board, there's problems. I mean, we know that there's a trade war, essentially. You have very deep trade tensions. You also have tensions in the people-to-people area, which you alluded to before. All this nasty rhetoric coming from Trump and his lieutenants is, I think, galvanizing the Trump base and leading to some really nasty anti-India narratives tied to issues like trade and, to immigration and visas, including the H-1B visa program, which is something that disproportionately benefits Indian workers. And also the administration is looking into changes to policies about international students in the U.S., a lot of Indian students that come to the U.S. So, the people-to-people ties, and if those are really struggling, then where do you look? I would also argue that, the strategic soundness of the relationship has come into question, right? It's conventional wisdom. Okay, even if things are not going well, there's this strong shared strategic goal of partnering together to counter China. Well, we know that India is looking to ease tensions with China. It's been doing that for almost a year. And even the U.S., even President Trump, despite some recent social media posts of him that have been very critical of China, he has said he wants to work with President Xi to promote peace and security and solve the world's problems. So that's the issue. And then finally, the much ballyhooed bromance between the two leaders themselves. That's maybe not shattered, but it's really been hurt in a big way. So where do you go from there? It's going to be very difficult. I think that the worst case scenario is that basically the relationship suffers during the remainder of the Trump administration. But then I suspect that after the next election here, though that won't be for another few years, that whoever takes over the White House will want to move quickly to get the relationship back on track. But it could be very difficult. But that's the worst case scenario. They're still cooperating, as I think I said before, on many in many areas. You have to look for off-ramp opportunities. Will there be an opportunity for the two leaders to clear the air? Well, they could always pick up the phone and talk to each other, but I don't think that either is interested in doing that. There have been some media reports that Trump tried to call Modi recently, and Modi wouldn't talk to him. And you mentioned the Quad. There is a Quad Leaders Summit scheduled to take place in India later this year. If President Trump goes, then that would be an opportunity for the two men to clear the air. But it's unclear if Trump would go. It's unclear if the summit would happen. And to your question about the Quad itself, that's not a large multilateral organization. It's a group of four. It's a mini-lateral entity. And so if you have one bilateral relationship within that four-member entity that's not working well, I don't see how the Quad could continue to work. I mean, I'm not saying that, the U.S.-India crisis is going to torpedo the Quad, but so long as the U.S.-India relationship is in crisis, it's hard to imagine the Quad being able to move forward. Now, if you contrast that with these larger multilateral efforts like IMEC, the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor, there's a large group of countries that are involved with that. And that has continued to go. There was a senior U.S. delegation that was in India recently, which included Ricky Gill, who's the top South Asia official at the NSC. And, there was talk, they were talking about IMEC, but that's different because it's much larger. I think it's the smaller and arguably more important, more influential entities like the Quad that could be hit hard by this U.S.-India crisis.
Fantastic. So that was fascinating, Michael. Thanks so much for your insights.